You've hidden eggs in your backyard every spring for as long as your kids can remember. You've watched them run across the grass with a basket in their hands, laughing, completely unaware that the whole thing started somewhere else. Are you one of those people who hand your kids that basket every single year without ever asking what you're actually handing them? Maybe you've done it since they were toddlers. Honestly, you've probably done it so many times you couldn't even tell me why you started, only that everyone around you was doing the same thing. Nobody tells you this part while you're standing in the candy aisle. What if that basket was never the real problem? What if somebody filled a basket for you 2,000 years ago and you've been so caught up hiding plastic eggs in the yard, you just walked right past it? I want you to think about something you do every single year without ever questioning it. You grew up watching everyone around you do the same thing without asking why, so it never crossed your mind that you needed to ask either. Most of what we carry into our families came to us already wrapped. We didn't pick the paper, we didn't pick the box. Your grandparents probably didn't pick it either. They just grew up watching it the same way you did, and at some point repeating it felt easier than asking about it. Somebody we trusted handed it to us, and we trusted it because they trusted it, and somewhere back further than either of us can see, somebody trusted it before that. That's not a flaw in you. That's just what it looks like to grow up inside a family, inside a culture, inside a calendar that was already running long before you were born. But every once in a while, life gets quiet, or honestly, just hits you hard enough that you actually stop and look inside the box. Maybe it's a sleepless night with a new baby, the kind where your brain starts wandering into questions you normally don't have time for. Or maybe one year the whole holiday just felt like a performance. You went through the motions because everyone expected you to show up in the right clothes, smiling on cue. For some of you, it's something your kid asked, some random question you didn't actually have an answer for, and it bugged you way more than you let on. And for a lot of you, honestly, it's just this quiet ache you get every year around this season. Everyone around you looks busy and joyful, and you're just tired, going through a holiday instead of actually living inside one. You smile for the photos, you say the right words at the right table, and underneath all of it, there's a question you've never let yourself finish asking. What if I told you that question wasn't a problem to manage? It was an invitation. We live loud lives, school schedules, work deadlines, family obligations, holidays that show up on the calendar, whether we're ready for them or not. And in the middle of all that noise, most of us never get a quiet enough moment to ask the one question that actually matters. Is what I'm holding real, or is it just familiar? Familiar feels safe, right? It doesn't ask anything of you. But the real thing, that asks for everything. So before we get anywhere near what actually happened on that first morning, I want to start somewhere most people skip completely: the name itself. Because if even the name of the thing you've celebrated your whole life turns out to be borrowed, that's worth your attention before we go any further. Most of us never think to ask where the word Easter even came from. It's literally not even in the original Greek or Hebrew text. There's exactly one place in an Old English Bible translation where that word slipped in, and every serious scholar today agrees it was a translation mistake, not a discovery. Every other time that same Greek word appears in the New Testament, it gets translated the way it should be: Passover. So where did the English word actually come from? Historians trace it back to a spring goddess named Eostre, written about centuries later by a monk who was just recording the name his own culture already used for the season. It's the same way you'd jot down Turkey Day without thinking twice about where that nickname actually came from. And here's the part that's easy to miss. English speakers are almost alone in keeping that name. In France, they call it Pâques. Across Spain and Latin America, they call it Pascua. Some grandmothers, who have never touched a theology book in their lives, just call it El Día de la Coneja. Bunny Day. Seriously, Bunny Day. Most of the world kept a name that points straight back to deliverance. But us, the English-speaking world, we stuck with the name of some ancient goddess nobody worships anymore, and a chocolate rabbit nobody can actually explain to a curious 8-year-old. That's not your fault. You didn't choose the name, It got handed to you, the same way the basket got handed to you. But once you know it, you can't really unknow it. And the real story doesn't start with that goddess at all. It starts 1500 years earlier, on a night in Egypt that had nothing to do with spring, and everything to do with blood on a door. Two fathers lived in the same country, on the exact same night. One of them lived inside the palace walls, with everything Egypt could offer a man: status, comfort, a family name that opened doors all over the city. The other lived a few miles away in a place called Goshen, with none of that, no status, no comfort, nothing the people in the palace would have envied. That night, God told every household in the land to do one specific thing if they wanted their firstborn son to live until morning. Take a lamb, a healthy one, nothing wrong with it. Kill it, and paint its blood across the doorframe of the house. Some father in Goshen actually had to do this with his own hands that night. Kill an animal his kids had probably been feeding all week, then smear the blood across his own front door with his fingers, having no idea yet whether any of it would actually work. The guy in the palace had power, guards, a family name that carried weight. The father in Goshen? He had zero backup. What he had was a lamb's blood on a piece of wood, and a promise from a God he couldn't see and didn't fully understand. Exodus 12:13 puts it plainly. The blood marks the house, and whatever moves through that night passes over the houses that carry it. That night, the angel of death didn't ask who had the better resume. It didn't care. It didn't ask who had more soldiers outside, or more wealth inside, or more reasons to feel untouchable. It asked exactly one question: is there blood on this door? The father with power and the father with nothing were judged by the same standard. One door had blood. One door didn't. By morning, that single detail was the only thing that mattered in the entire country. That night, sound carried differently across that land. In the palace and in every grand house around it, the air filled with the kind of crying that doesn't stop for hours, the kind that comes from losing the one person a family built its whole future around. A few miles away in Goshen, it was quiet. Whatever moved through that land that night reached every door it came to, except the ones already marked with blood. That same night, after painting the blood, they ate the lamb together, standing up, dressed and ready to walk out the door, because freedom was coming faster than anyone expected. For the next 1500 years, the people who walked out of Egypt that night kept telling that story to their children, the same way you might tell your kids where their grandparents came from. A lamb, blood on a door, a father trusting something he couldn't fully explain, simply because he'd been told it would save the people he loved. They didn't know it yet, but they were rehearsing something that hadn't happened. They were acting out a scene before the main character had even arrived. 1500 years later, in that same city, in that same season, a different lamb was led through the streets of Jerusalem, not one bought at a market. A man, walking toward a hill, while priests a few hundred yards away were slaughtering Passover lambs by the thousands, with no idea the real one was walking past them on his way to die. One lamb, one door, one night that changed every night that came after it. On that hill, outside the city walls, the same pattern played out one final time, except this time it wasn't a lamb's blood on a piece of wood. It was his own. Sin had walked through every door in the world for as long as people had been opening them. It didn't care about status, comfort, or whose name was on the front gate. On that hill, death walked up to a door, expecting the same easy win. The wood looked ordinary, but because of the blood, this time it couldn't break through. Something that had never let go of anything finally let go. And 3 days later, the door it thought it had sealed shut for good swung open from the inside. If that blood was enough to save a family who didn't fully understand it, then maybe the real question isn't whether you understand every detail. It's what you're doing with the part you already do understand. That question gets uncomfortable fast, especially once you become a parent. Almost nobody says this part out loud. Most of us have no problem handing our kids a story about a rabbit that hides eggs in the yard, and then go quiet the second they ask us a real question about the door with blood on it. Ask a kid what the Easter Bunny does, and they'll give you a full answer without blinking. Ask them what the blood on a door in Egypt has to do with anything, and most adults in the room will suddenly need to check their phone. If you've ever felt that gap, confident teaching your kids about a bunny, awkward teaching them about a cross, you're not the only parent who's felt it. That gap isn't really about theology. It's about which story you trust enough to actually hand to someone you love. A rabbit costs you nothing. Nobody's faith has ever been tested by a chocolate egg. A cross costs you something every time you bring it up, because the moment you say it out loud, you're saying you believe it for yourself too. So before we talk about empty tombs and occupied thrones, there's a harder question sitting underneath all of it. What story are you actually living on, the days nobody's watching, after the basket's put away and the candy wrappers are in the trash? Your kids aren't going to remember the candy. What they're actually going to remember, whether you realize it or not, is whether you believed what you told them, or whether you were just keeping a tradition warm for one more year. If what you believe about that cross is what you're actually willing to live by, then what happened 3 days after it changes what you're allowed to lean on. Most retellings of this story stop too early. They get you to the empty tomb, the stone rolled away, the disciples running to look inside, and then the story quietly fades out. But the empty tomb was never the end. It was the doorway into the next part. He didn't just walk out of that tomb and disappear into history. He went somewhere, and he's been doing something there every single day since. Think about the last time you needed someone to speak up for you in a room you weren't allowed into. Maybe it was a job you didn't get to defend yourself for, or some conversation about you happening in a room you weren't even invited to. You know that feeling, hoping somebody in that room actually has your back. I've talked with people who say the hardest part of their week isn't any single bad thing that happens. It's the quiet sense that nobody's actually fighting for them, that they're managing life completely on their own and just haven't said it out loud to anyone. That's the closest picture I can give you for what's happening right now, today, while you're watching this. He's in a room you can't see, and he's not silent in it. He's speaking on your behalf, not because you earned a seat at that table, but because he's the one who got you one. That's not a metaphor someone invented to make you feel better. This idea is all over the New Testament. Christ literally seated at the right hand of God, bringing your case forward right this second, while you're just trying to get through a random Tuesday. Once that lands, the resurrection stops being a fact you nod along to once a year. It becomes the reason you're not actually alone, in any room you can't control. Every anxious thought you've had about being judged, exposed, or found lacking, he's already standing in that room before you even walk into it. You're not pleading your own case anymore. Somebody already did that for you, and he's still doing it. If you've spent years feeling like you have to hold everything together on your own, like nobody's really in your corner when it counts, I want you to hear this clearly. You were never supposed to carry that weight by yourself. The same blood that covered a door in Egypt is the blood that gives you access to a throne room you didn't earn your way into. You don't walk in nervous, hoping not to get caught. You walk in as someone whose case has already been settled. This is why the resurrection was never meant to be a once-a-year memory. A father who's alive doesn't visit his kids once a year. He's there in the morning, he's there at night, and he's there on some random Tuesday when nothing special is happening and you still need him. If walking into that room changes how you see yourself, then it changes how you treat the one day a week you're allowed to actually stop. There's a question that tends to show up once people start taking all of this seriously. So what? Do I need to pick a specific day and follow a bunch of strict rules just to get this right? I understand why that question comes up. Once you realize a tradition you inherited wasn't quite what you thought, it's natural to start wondering what else needs a second look. I want you to notice something. The instruction was never, rest so that I'll love you. It was, rest because I already do. A good father doesn't make his kids earn a nap. He makes them take one because he can see they're running on empty, and he loves them too much to let them keep pretending they're fine. Jesus actually told a crowd of completely wiped out people the exact same thing once. He said, "Come to me if you're carrying too much, and I'll give you a place to put it down. Think about that. That's the voice of a father who sees his kids are running on fumes, opening his arms before anyone even asks. Some of us learned somewhere along the way that slowing down meant we weren't trying hard enough, that a tired body and a guilty conscience were just part of being a serious, responsible person. If you're the kind of person who feels guilty resting, who feels like slowing down means falling behind, that guilt didn't come from him. It came from the same culture that handed you a basket without ever explaining what was inside it. Rest was never the reward for getting your theology perfect. It was the proof that you finally believe someone else is holding what you've been gripping so tightly. You can stop performing, stop calculating whether you've earned a quiet moment this week, and just lean back into a love that was settled on a door in Egypt and sealed at an empty tomb long before you were ever born to worry about any of it. I think about the people who've told me they feel like they're failing at faith because life got loud and they missed a routine, missed a Sunday, missed the version of themselves they think God expects. If that's you, I want you to actually hear this instead of just reading past it. The father in Goshen didn't earn the blood on his door by being a better man than the one in the palace. He simply believed what he was told, and he rested in it. That's the whole requirement. Trust and then rest. So here's the challenge, and I want you to actually sit with it instead of scrolling past it. The next time you hand your kids that basket, or the next time you say the words, "He is risen," out of habit, don't just say them the same way you said them last year. Ask yourself this: if your kids only remember one thing about this season 20 years from now, do you want it to be the candy? Or do you want it to be that their parent actually believed there was blood on a door, an empty tomb, and a throne that's still occupied right now? Because once you've actually seen it, the lamb, the door, the grip that finally broke, the throne that's never once sat empty, you don't really get to celebrate the same shallow way again. You can still hide the eggs if you want to. That was never the point of any of this. The point was always whether you know what's actually being celebrated underneath it. Think about the kitchen the morning after. Wrappers on the counter, the basket pushed to the side, the house finally quiet. That's usually when the real question shows up, if you let it. So take a breath, let the noise of the season go quiet for a second, and just say thank you to the one who didn't need you to have it all figured out before he decided you were worth dying for. Thank you for being the lamb I didn't deserve. Thank you for the blood on the door and the stone that didn't stay in place. Help me live like someone who believes you're still on that throne on an ordinary Tuesday, the same way I believe it on the one Sunday a year I actually remember to say so. Amen.